Well, that's a great song to begin a talk with, because aren't we always craving? I mean, this is the tale of the human condition, is to crave. Until we realize that really we have to learn to detach. And this is the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing because we really think this is it, folks. I mean, this is our world. This is someplace that this is where we belong. So I really, we're going through a lot of challenges right now, a lot of challenging times in the world, not just here in America, but in the world. And there's reasons for that. And it doesn't help so much to know what they are, really, but when you understand them a bit, you can sort of say, okay, this is temporary. So I always try to do that with my audience, to understand this is temporary, this craziness that we're in right now, but to also learn a big lesson from that this is not really your true home, that you're here on a journey in, and you know how to get in, but you don't know how to get out. And that's probably, and I was saying to Donnell early, I said, that's our biggest fear. Our biggest fear and anxiety is actually dying and getting out of here. And I have also said to Donnell this morning that a lot of people are leaving. And I don't know if you see it in your life or your friends or your family members. They're choosing to get out of here. And it's usually cancer, stroke, something, sometimes sudden, but for the most part, it's a method that will finally end this journey here. So the talk I started out on it was about living while dying. That was one idea, and I thought, well, that doesn't go over for a while. And although there is a person from India that I'm going to take a 6-day intensive with, where you learn to die while you're living. Well, you will go through the stage of death into some consciousness realm that you're able to get to without any drugs, but you're able to do it through the breath. And so this intrigues me. He's a 90-year-old Indian from India who knows the techniques and has been teaching them around the world. And so it's brought me to that topic of learning how to live here, but always being prepared to leave. And how do we live here in our optimum state? And why would we ever come here? And why would we be here at this time? So there was a lot of stuff, and I went back to Wallace Wattles. Anybody know Wallace Wattles, The Wisdom of Wallace Wattles? He was the book that everybody stole from. He wrote in 1911, The Science of Getting Rich. And then he wrote The Science of Being Great and The Science of Being Well. I recommend everybody get The Wisdom of Wallace Wattles and read these 3 sections of his book, because it teaches you really how to live while you're here before you die, or in between birth and death. And we welcome this beautiful baby, Desi, this morning, 3 months old, full of promise, a real gift to humanity. And every time one of us leaves, it's really one of us that's leaving, because we know one day it will be our time. But in between, we want to live wisely. We want to live knowing that we always are at that point of leaving. Even though we're driving down 60, 15, 10 this morning to get here, we never know, but we do know better how to live our lives. So we have a lot of things going on in our culture today that is pretty ugly looking. And it's very uncertainty is the main word, unstable, very fearful. So our big anxiety, I would say, is fear. It's caused by fear. Fear of not having enough, fear of getting old and being alone, fear of outliving your money, or not having any money if you live. See, it's fear. So I went back through some of the lessons I'd learned over time, and I realized that, well, these are very much traits of the old Piscean age that's leaving. And that we should understand that it isn't due to our time. It's actually an old phase of our evolution. And remember, what you see now is just an evolution. We're not a finished product here. Our society's not a finished product. We're always in progress. We're always evolving. So it's very, very important that you recognize that part. So a lot of the change that's taking place now is really so that we will become the higher part of ourselves. And we will work with these higher energies and that are being brought into the world right now. So you're here to permit yourself to cross into these energies and this energy arc from who you were to who you will be. So the past can no longer serve you as it did before. And you can't go back. You're moving away from a space that's still connected to this old Piscean age. And I'd say that period of time was probably 2,600 years. And you're in the final phases of it now. And the Piscean age was based on external direction. So somebody told you. The king told you. The Pope told you. It was always external direction. And that phase is completed. So it taught you how to focus. It gave you structure. It gave you direction. And it was based on with a geometric sign of the square. So it was kind of rigid laws. And the teaching tool was fear. So we've evolved now to a state, we're using a new teaching tool, where love, and all things goes around with love, and the Aquarian age, which is based on the circle. Now that's just phasing in. So what you have is this old anxiety, old, do what I tell you stuff, into this new structure. And this is very painful period as we transition. It's like the chrysalis of a butterfly. So you have to adjust to this new energy, and to do this you have to deal with your fears. And the greatest fear you will have is dying. And people say, oh, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. We'll talk about prosperity. And we'll talk about success. But we don't want to talk about that. But you want to understand that fear will no longer rule you. Instead, it can help alert you. So fear doesn't have to be this paralysis that we have. And you can no longer go back to the way the things were. No matter what they're telling you about getting our old manufacturing job back, it's a bunch of hooey. Because that's gone. We really never can go back. The energy we work with is always moving forward. So we're going through a rough period, but we're always going through it. I said this when I was a little kid. I thought, I used to know, you'd always recite the 23rd Psalm, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because thou art with me. And I'm like, well, the optimum word in that is through. We didn't stay there, and we didn't have coffee. We just kept right on going through the valley of the shadow of death. That's kind of what you're going through, is your own valley of the shadow of death. Okay? And so you can remember the past, but you can't go back, and you can't go back to it. So we'll no longer go back to the way the things were in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and all these things we're getting in the newsprint and all this stuff. It's more about fear, anxiety, and revving up. It's an old, dying structure. The worst years of this cycle are 2015 to 2019, and guess what you're in? You're right in the middle of it. Some people say, when will this end? Well, it's got its own process. Evolution doesn't just happen overnight. It processes and evolves like we do. So remember, you are never out of control if you trust yourself. Okay? You're not out there looking for them to tell you. You learn to trust yourself. So children who have not learned to trust themselves grow into very insecure adults. So it's important to teach your children. We will go back and say, well, gee, they'll talk about helicopter parents, or we'll talk about hovering over children. Children need to learn to trust themselves because it's an inner directed with guidance, but you're making up your own decisions to trust yourself. But in the old age, everything came from outside. And now you're learning to what I call trust your intuition. And because this time there is so much moving energy, everything is escalated. And the veil is lifting between these worlds. You hear these words, I'm like, oh, phooey. What does that mean? It means we're going to start going beyond our physical senses. You've got to learn to trust your intuition. It will help you go into these spiritual senses. And nobody can do this for you. So it's the end of work as we know it to be. The downsizing, all these things you see, it's really all part of this evolutionary change. So fear will cause you the most problems of any emotion you will have. It will lead to self-doubt, low self-esteem, lack of trust in yourself. And in changing your life, you have to make the choice to weaken fear. It will create paralysis. We all suffer from the same universal fears of abandonment, separation, dying, self-worth, trust, blah, 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 all that stuff. So these are just some of the observations, because my clients come to me, it's always fear. I mean, you can wrap it up in another package. It's fear. And so this period of time that I've spoken on it, and I was here, the last time I was here was the very end of January, I think. We had just gotten a new president. And here we are. Are we having fun yet? A lot.
More than you want.
Yeah, more than you could. It's a show. It's a carnival show. And it's not surprising because whether we realize it or not, we're revisiting the old revolution of, the 1700s, the latter part of 1700s. And this transformation of America doesn't happen overnight. And at first they seem random, these events, and now they're not so random anymore. So what we're dealing with is this big 16-year cycle that I spoke about before, and there were confrontations, competition, internal political struggle, all this stuff, and it's shaking us to our very core. We're evolving. This is what it looks like. So things have become more conservative, more righteous, all this stuff. And what's happening to America, she's going to change from the inside out. That's what it feels like. It's like you're being ripped apart. So some people will feel like their existence is really being threatened. That's how it should feel right now. And so the greatest time of this upheaval, you're right smack in the middle of it. It's a big 5-year cycle, 2015 through 2019, so 2017, and it feels like it's right on point. It's like, ooh, it can't get any worse. So it's a turbulence creating this new evolution of what America will be. So the political, social, cultural, economic changes will mark the rebirth of the United States. So that's the power and the positive, but it's not yet. You have to go through this first. And it will feel like everything is being threatened, challenging this land ownership, security, wealth, supremacy, blah, all this kinds of stuff. And I have said before that we have to return to the original founding purpose of this country, and that's what's going on. And when you think of it in that light, it is not the same thing as, oh my God, the sky is falling, Chicken Little or Henny Penny, I can't remember who. But, I went back to Wallace Wattles. I even went to the Stoics. Anybody know who the Stoics are? Okay, let me explain the Stoics briefly, because you may want to acquaint yourself with the Stoics. Back in the time before Jesus Christ, there were many, many cults. The Stoics, the Gnostics, the Cynics, the Epicureans. These were all cults that went on for hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 years, that were formed after Alexander the Great conquered that entire region of the world. He did it all in 10 years, and he broke down what we call the temple state. Everything for 3,500 years had been run by the temples and the priests and a system, and that system fell apart, and there was complete chaos. So we had Greek come in and basically take over, because he was from Macedonia, part of Greece. Anyway, the long and the short of, to fill this void came all these cults. And the cults of the Stoic was one of them. And they were about 1,000 years. And some of your greatest thinkers from the Greek and Roman period came out of the Stoics. And much of the Stoics' words were later, fast forward a few hundred years, put into Jesus' mouth. So a lot of your writings from Jesus are actually the writings of the Stoics. And you can go back and you'll see this quote, well, that was 1,000 years before Jesus. Yeah, well, so you'll see all these, but everybody kind of borrowed, the religions all borrowed from everybody else. And Mithras religion became part of Christianity, so we just celebrated Christmas in December, and all of these things. But the Stoics had an incredible philosophy, and all of your people that are quoted today, and the books the gentleman from South Africa who was imprisoned for 27 years, Nelson Mandela, this is what he studied to get through his imprisonment, to understand the prison guards as really being human beings, how to handle your life, and to go forward. And it was the Stoics teaching. So I recommend the Stoics in modern life, and there's many books on this. This will help you a great deal in handling stuff, because stuff is not going to stop. It's just going to keep coming. But how we handle it and how we prepare for it. I mean, for one thing, when we know we're going to Costco the day before Christmas, we kind of prepare so we know what that's going to be like. So we don't rail against it when it's terrible. You know, and we couldn't get a parking space, and it was awful, the lines were long. But we knew that going in. So this is part of the Stoics teaching. You know that. You prepare each day. You prepare each day. If you're going to get on the freeway, it's going to be a lot of traffic. There's no sense in railing about it. You know what it is, handle it, and that's how you deal with a lot of problems that seem to be so random. So a couple of these rules I would like to impart to you, and along with the wisdom of Wallace Wattles, who, again, so you want the Stoics in a modern world, and you want to get the wisdom of Wallace Wattles. This is going to help you get through this period, because they're very high teachings, and they're universal, and they don't die out with an age. They're everlasting. And you must always come from what we call the principles of life. And trusting yourself is very, very important, very, very important. One of the things that I wrote down here, and where did I write that down? Well, I have it written somewhere. How nice is that? The 3 things that I wanted you to get about the conduct. I was so careful in putting it down, and I left it somewhere, maybe in the car. That's great. Well, anyway, it's questions you want to ask yourself. How should you conduct yourself in your world and treat others? And how do you deal with life's challenges and vicissitudes? And how do you prepare to die? Those 3 questions you want to ask yourself. And moving on, another one of these wonderful ideas from the Stoics is think in advance about the challenges you're going to face during the day. Now, I knew when I left the house the challenges I would have. Driving here, did I leave enough time to get here? Just in case, so I'm not crazy or work myself into anxiety. And before going to bed at night, do you review the day? Do you write this down? So they recommend you write down, where did you make mistakes? What could you have done better without beating yourself up? And this will help you learn from your experiences to forgive yourself for your mistakes. What was done or left undone. So review your acts for good deeds and be glad, and for bad deeds, acknowledge them and help correct them. So you do this every day. You just do it at night. And if you don't remember to write it down, then review the day before you go to sleep. Where did I screw up? What could I have done better? And what did I learn from this? And so each day you're literally adjusting yourself and forgiving yourself and helping yourself for the next day. So learn to separate to what is in your power and what is outside your power. That's extremely important. This lets you approach everything with equanimity and tranquility. Do I have a dog in this fight or not? No, this is not my fight. And when my daughter comes in and starts her tale of woe about something or other and she wants my agreement, this is not my control. This is not mine. You know, I'll say, I'm not a garbage dump, so don't dump it on me. And I know what is in my power to help and what isn't my power. And anybody who has children, you understand this very well. This is not in your power. If they are using drugs, this is not in your power. It's not in your power. So you learn to separate, understand the difference, and internalize the difference, and you will be happier with these efforts. And always contemplate the broader picture. We have a tendency to catastrophize things. I mean, we're doing a lot of that, right? This is terrible. Oh my God. We catastrophize the simplest things. No, that is not a catastrophe. Your child died, that's a catastrophe. Particularly if it was something that you hadn't expected and just there, that's a catastrophe. Or a village is wiped out, that's a catastrophe. No, the fact that you're delayed a half hour, you missed your flight is not a catastrophe. Or you had to wait in the airport because your plane was delayed, that is not a catastrophe. So stop catastrophizing your life. Contemplate the broader picture. Look at the view from above. This is very important. Sometimes you can actually laugh at it. Epictetus wrote, he was a slave, and then he was released from his situation, and he started School of Philosophy in Greek, and he had a very philosophical outlook on dying. And he said, I have to die. Well, each one of us has to die. We know that. If it is now, well, then I die now. If it's later, then now I will take my lunch, since the hour for lunch has arrived, and dying I will tend to later. So can you look at it that way? Okay. And I have clients who have cancer, and some of them are doing well, some of them are not doing well. But they're still alive, and they're still living, and they're not dead yet. So it's very important, no matter what is your situation, that you continue to live. That you continue to have something that is positive that you can do or be, and include and not isolate. And always expect divine assistance. Whenever I work with anybody on manifesting, one of the first laws of manifestation is expect divine assistance. You have to go in the game knowing that, no matter what the world of appearance is, no matter what the world of appearance is. And which brings me to my dear friend Wallace Wattles. Wallace Wattles wrote his book in 1911, and he was a simple man. And then people from these self-help movements, science of mind, many of the things came out of Wallace Wattles. And Wallace Wattles, a lot of his work came out of the Hindu books and all the ancient teachings. But he put them in very modern, simple worlds. And the section of his book that intrigued me was the science of being great. Because there is actually a science to being great. And yes, there is. And there is a science of getting rich, too. And there's a science of being well. And none of this is about greed or craving. But there's universal principles, and you have to understand them. But what intrigued me about the science of being great is I couldn't name anybody who was great now. Living now. Leaders who were great. I couldn't figure out anybody who was really great. The last leader I think America had that was really, truly great was Abraham Lincoln. We might give Franklin Roosevelt a great, but we definitely can give Lincoln a great, because he was really a universal principle person. And you read any of his writings and how his practice was, he was really tied to the universal principles, which we have to really learn to tie ourselves to. Universal principles is really a deep faith, and faith comes out of deep wisdom. And that must never, never falter. No matter what, if you ask for something and didn't show up, you cannot lose your faith because it didn't show up. It's continuing on, moving forward, always evolving, processing, and always, always rising to the higher viewpoint. So we as individuals have to be ready to continue to develop into the higher viewpoint, whether we use the Stoics to help us, which I recommend, or we use Wallace Wattles, which I also recommend. It does not good if you speak of faith in God, but you still have not overcome your anxiety, worry, and fear. See, it's really hard. So do I or not? And I keep getting tested on this. Whatever I tell an audience, I get tested on. I get tested big time sometimes. I'm like, whoa. And I have to go back to the drawing board and say, doesn't matter. It's the world of appearance. I'm here. I understand. When I go home, this was a good visit here. But this is not here. I use these experiences. I work with these. But I know the universal principles and wherefore we all come. So it is impossible for an anxious, worried person or a fearful one to perceive the truth. All things become distorted. They become thrown out of proper relations by such mental states. And those who are in them cannot read the thoughts of God. And that's what Abraham Lincoln was so good at doing. He could read the thoughts of God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God. And without faith, it is impossible for you to become great. You cannot become great without faith. The distinguishing characteristics of all really great men and women is an unwavering faith. Today, there is too much training of the intellect and the reasoning power and too little training in obedience to the soul. And by going back to your own center, you can always find the pure idea of right for every relationship. You must conform your life to the pure ideas as you find in the great within. That's why we go within, touch that base, which we hardly ever get to go to. We're so busy. Every compromise you make on this point is made at the expense of a loss of power. And we compromise all over the place, but you must remember this. Every compromise on this point is made at the expense of a loss of power. So I'll just name a few steps, and then I'll wrap it up because I could go on and on. There are many ideas in your mind that you have outgrown and which form force of habit, and you still permit to dictate the actions of your life. Abandon everything that you have outgrown. And you know what they are. The ones that belittle you, dwarf you, and keep you acting a small way. Learn to rise above all this. And you have perhaps formed some habits, which is eating wrong or whatever. Stop denigrating the body. I always say the body is like a great racehorse. When you were born, you were given one. One, that's it. It's like giving you the best car in the world when you were born. And that's the only car you're going to get in this lifetime. This is the only horse you're going to get in this lifetime. So if you had bought a really fabulous horse, you would treat it well, you'd probably board it well, you'd really take care of it. And if you didn't, it would throw you off, or it would go lame or something. So it's very important that you keep the body very healthy, because if you don't have the body, you can't stay here. So it's very relevant. The body has to be relevant. You have to let it know it's relevant. Fix upon your ideal of what you wish to make of yourself. Consider well and be sure that you made the right choice. And don't pay attention to the advice or suggestion of others around you. Do not believe that anyone can know better than yourself what is right for you. Listen to what others have to say, but always form your own conclusion. These are all Wallace Wattles. These are all kind of basic stuff. And remember that the function of the will is to direct the thought. Nothing can make you great but thought. Remember they said today, thoughts are prayers? Nothing can make you great but thought. You don't care how much money you have, how successful you have, how much you own, you cannot be great. You can just have success or money, and that they can go. And they can make you sick, and they can make you bitter. Do not get into a hurry and act from superficial impulses. You can trust God for the solution of all your personal riddles, things I can't figure out or I'm indecisive. There is no hurry. There is no hurry, because your life is not going to end. You're moving on out of this realm, but your life is not, there's no hurry. Many times I think, in another life, I'd like to do X, Y, and Z, because I'm not going to get it done in this one. I know that. And so I'm kind of like seeding for future times. I'd like to just give that one a go. And so, but I also know that this is not all there is by being here. This is a time and a window, an experience. So you want to make the best of it. Be wise. Use your thoughts wisely, because they are prayer. You're literally seeding what you're going to manifest in your world. And do you want that? And people say, oh, especially a new thought, I don't want that. But then they continue to think on it. So hurry and fear will instantly cut your connection off with the universal mind, and you will have no power. So no wisdom, no information until you are calm. So fear turns faith into weakness. So we go back to fear. Remember that poise and power are inseparably associated. So develop poise and power. And remember that your presence precedes you when you walk in a room. So it's how do we live this way in today's world? Understand that this is who you really are. Get out of fear, worry, all of that. And recognize it. Just through those 4 points of the Stoics, just alone will be of benefit to you. Every night, review the day. How was it? What did you do? And here's something I wanted to, again, this was from the Stoics, and the existential anxiety. It comes primarily from our fear of death. But the fear is misguided for a number of reasons. First, because death is a natural process that leads into the same state in which we were, so to speak, for a long time before we were born. We didn't suffer then, and we're not going to suffer after we die. And second, and more crucially, we're actually dying every day, meaning both that every day brings us closer to the end, and also that we don't really know when that last moment will come. And that is what gives the Stoics an urgency to live life at its fullest and not waste time on trivial matters or the pursuit of empty pleasures. And that's why we don't want to catastrophize simple things, stupid stuff. I mean, I've done it, I know. But I'm getting better. I'm getting better at recognizing my own stuff, because we're all human having this experience. But we are in an evolutionary process. Understand the next few years are not what I'll say easy years, but if you're centered and you know how to manage yourself, and that's the only thing you can manage, you can't manage time, the only thing you can manage is you, and get your value system straightened out, and understand you can get through the next few years very, very well, regardless of what's going on around you. We have, the universe is very mathematical. It's very scientific, otherwise they couldn't measure anything out there. It's very scientific. And coming in December, there's another 3-year period, 3-year window of stuff. So I said we need to turn our front lawns into vegetable farms, because we're going to learn to really be thrifty. We're going to learn to really not waste. We're going to learn to really the value of things over the next 3 years when this period comes in. And this will be like the last kind of big hurrah for this old stuff of America. So by 2020, you can see a very different change. It's funny, it falls also when the next election comes. It's going to fall around the same time. So this intense kind of rough period is ahead, but you know who you are and what you can do. You already know what you belong to and where your real home is. This is your visitation period. This is your visitation. You've come here to learn certain qualities. And one of them is free will choice, and the other is to work with emotional energy here. So the biggest one is fear, which you are now dissipating. So if anything I can leave you with today is a hopefulness of the future and your own life, no matter what the stage you're in. It's very important that you come back to the center, just like today. So I wanted to let you, I don't want to go overtime on this, so I want to thank you so much for being here today.